to this webinar from whichever part of the world you're joining. Thank you so much for taking the time off to join this session. And we hope you have a wonderful experience and go home with a lot of new insights about the industry. Um, Let me introduce myself. I'm Prem with the um, marketing team at Roambee, and the topic that we are going to cover today is telematics aggregation versus sensor driven visibility. And I will be your host. Um, why are we picking this topic of telematics aggregation versus sensor driven visibility? First of all, I think what is important for us all to understand is that supply chain visibility has actually become a space of its own, very similar to how ERP became a space of its own, CRMs became a space of its own, as well as supply chain tools, WMS systems or TMS systems became a category of its own. So, in the supply chain visibility category today, which the Gartners and the foresters of the world are talking about, there are essentially a lot of confusion between two very key models of how supply chain visibility is built. And one of that is the aggregation model or the telematics aggregation model, and the other one is the sensor driven visibility model. And that is precisely what we are going to basically get more insights about, declutter what they are, and help everybody here understand what is the right choice for their business. And to do this, we have with us a couple of very eminent panelists, and I'm going to introduce them in a minute. But before that, I would like to just go over a few housekeeping rules so that you can maximize your experience in this webinar. So, can you pull up the housekeeping rules, please? First of all, I request everybody to take a moment, make yourselves very familiar with the UI here. The first thing that you have is you have a chat option, which you see on the top right. And in this chat option, whatever you type is going to be broadcast publicly. So you can think of this like you're at an event and you're chatting online with all of the attendees that are there. So feel free to use this option, engage, maybe get to know some of your peers you're attending, and feel free to leverage that. What we also have on the top right is we have the Q&A option. Now, this option is something you could use to ask one of the panelists or ask me a question. If you type something on chat, does not mean we would be noticing that. So I would specifically request you to use the Q&A option to direct a question to the panelist. And that said, there is also one more thing that I wanted to definitely bring to your attention. There could be, as with any technology, there could be technical issues that any of us could face. So at that point, please feel free to use the technical support option, which is also available on your UI. So I'm just going to give 30 seconds for each of you to kind of familiarize yourself with that. And then let's get going with talking about the panelists of the day. All right. Great. So I would request the first panelist of the day to come on stage. And the first panelist of the day we have is Yak. To tell you a little bit about Yak, Yak is the director of research from Sixfold Transporeon. And Transporeon, as you guys know, is also a partner of Roambee. And Sixfold is the real time visibility arm of Transporeon. Now, to tell you a little bit of Yak, he looks into medium and long term future revenues and customer markets. So, for example, Yak is working on carbon visibility, and he's also working on multimodal visibility, which is actually an extension or an expansion of Transporeon's core business, which is road transportation. Yak comes with a very strong software technology background across the full stack, mobile apps, IoT, maps, geotech, etc. And he's an entrepreneur. He has started and managed a tech startup called Nutitech, and the startup went on to get acquired by Carto DB, which is now called Carto. And prior to that, he was the CTO of ReachU, which is also in this space, which is a global LBS technology or location based services technology provider. Yak lives in Estonia, which is also the Sixfold's main office, and he's joining in from there. So, welcome, Yak. We look forward to gathering a lot of insights from you. The second
Hello.
panelist who I welcome on stage is my own colleague, Scott Hurley. Scott, welcome. Scott heads product marketing, sales enablement, and pre sales at Roambee. He also comes with tremendous amount of experience, especially in the SaaS or software as a service space in transportation and the logistics market. He's played various roles in SaaS companies in this space, such as Here Technologies. And he's also been a GIS consultant, which is a geographical information systems consultant. And due to all of this expertise that Scott brings in the transport market, he was also recently appointed as a representative on the Transportation Advisory Board of the City of Naperville at Illinois. Um, of course, one more fact about Scott, which many of you who have interacted with him may not know, is Scott is a die-hard Rocky fan, and he gets teary-eyed every time he sees a Rocky movie. So, to all those Rocky fans out there you go. Scott,
Thanks, man.
welcome, and we look forward to gathering a lot of insights from you as well as Yak. Well, so now that we have the panelists on stage, what I want to do is start diving into some of the very basic questions about these two types of visibility, right? And no better way to start with than what is each of these types of visibility. So maybe Yak, I'd request you to go first. What is telematics aggregation at very grassroots level? And tell me your experience in why this model was a model of choice. And there are a lot of companies today which have actually built aggregation based on telematics. And this has become a very popular method which a lot of companies are using.
Yeah. Hello, and I'm starting a little bit from the historical point of view from our company perspective. So we started a few years ago, so it's still kind of advanced startup right now. Even through Transporeon is pretty big established company in this market. Sixfold has been a smaller one, which has been part of that quite
Yak,
soon.
I don't know. I just want to check if everybody can hear you fine. Just checking with our panel if you're audible. Excellent. Go ahead, Yak. You're perfectly
Okay.
audible.
Okay. So yeah, Sixfold started a few years ago, and we started with a little bit different problem than telematics. We started with matchmaking of carriers and shippers, and this has been a kind of typical problem or very simple idea that we see a lot of half-empty trucks. Why we cannot fill it? Why we cannot build something like Uber for trucks or something like that? So there was a lot of experimentation around this area, but this market didn't really work that way. We learned a lot of things the hard way that it's really difficult to do. But as one side problem there was that we needed to know where the trucks are. So it was about truck locations, truck optimizations, and this information was not easily available. So we started with a mobile app actually. So we built a very simple app which gets GPS coordinates and also some messaging with drivers, and try to use this as also as a location information and as a sensor in a way. Of course, mobile apps do have some advantages, but we've found out that actually it is super difficult to get these mobile apps to the drivers' phones. They just don't want to install it. They don't trust it. Their phones are too old. These apps are auto closed if they're running on background. So a lot of problems there. And then we started to look for alternatives, and we discovered that okay, most of the trucks already have some telematics systems there. So why not try to use this telematics for at least passive following of them? And then we thought that okay, how hard it can be. We connect to Volvo and Mercedes and MAN and to these big truck producer systems and get it done. But then we discovered another problem. Not so many companies are actually using this built-in systems. They are using aftermarket things. And then we discovered there are hundreds and hundreds of providers, different providers of these systems and service providers. And but we already started with this telematic approach and then just continued connecting to more and more providers, get to more and more information. And yeah, the main point of that was that it was kind of cheap and passive, as this hardware is already there typically. We just need to find a way to connect to that. And we thought it's easy. It actually turned out to be quite difficult through to different carriers and got a lot of such connections. And yeah, that's how we ended up being a telematic aggregator. Then we kind of ditched the idea of the matchmaking and became part of Transporeon family of different services and companies actually right now, and to telematic aggregation.
It's a very interesting story, Yak, because it seems like it was an Uber for trucks. It's then transformed into the Tinder for trucks, where you're actually matchmaking and trying to figure out the loads. And now it's really turning out into something like a Google Home, right? So you have a lot of different appliances in your house where you have individual apps for to control each of them. I'm talking about smart appliances like your fridge, your microwave, and so on. But then you have Google Home today, which is actually able to integrate all of that data. So you have one common access to control all of these sensors, which are aggregated to the platform. I think brilliant story there on how the whole telematics aggregation platforms were built and conceptualized. So let's move on to understanding the other mode of supply chain visibility, which is sensor driven from Scott. This is what we at Roambee do, and Scott's been involved with the product and the marketing and the GTM of a lot of these technologies. So Scott, tell us what is sensor driven visibility at its basics.
Sure. Well, I won't beat around the bush. You see the word sensor is a part of sensor driven visibility, which means that we have embedded or attached IoT sensors with shipments or assets that are connected in real time to the cloud, understanding the location, condition, and status of shipments or assets anywhere in the world. And then because we believe that better data in uh, drives better data out, then actionable intelligence or analytics on top of that data can be used from the inputs that come from sensors. But we purposefully call it sensor driven and not sensor visibility because it's not the only input that is used in sensor driven visibility. So, an analogy would be the captain of a ship. The captain is not the only one necessary to fly a ship, right? You have a whole staff. You think of Captain Kirk in Star Trek, for example, providing different inputs in context for what's going on. So, in addition to inputs, direct firsthand inputs from sensors that are with the shipments themselves, we also have integrations with ERP systems so we can make the information actionable so we know information about the shipments. We have integrations with curated external data streams, whether it's traffic, weather, whether it's a shipment, or I'm sorry, a port operations system, anything that can provide additional context to the inputs from the sensors to be able to create a signal and making that signal as actionable and reliable as it needs to be really requires having that context on top of it. And so we also believe that sensor driven visibility is fundamental to where we're all trying to go eventually is an autonomous supply chain. So having embedded machine to machine communications, understanding um, as accurately, as timely, and granularly as possible what's going on and how it interacts with the world will allow us to not just understand what we should do next, perhaps, but actually tell us what to do and do it.
Great. So I think we understood at a very grassroots level what each of these types of visibilities are. So one is where you're actually crowdsourcing, and the other place is you're actually using your own sensor. But that's not the only mode of visible of collecting data. That's it's sensor driven, which means that the sensor is primary, and then there's contextual data streams and all of that going into that, which means that you are not actually collecting data from the transport providers, but end to end, you're actually using a single sensor. I think with laying that down on what each type of visibility is, I'm going to take a short break here, and I encourage each of you to keep asking questions on the go. So this would be the first of the Q&A breaks. We'll have multiple of them so that we can make it very interactive. So I'm going to take a slight pause here and await for any questions so far before we move on to understanding more about these types of visibility. Okay, there's quite a lot of questions. So let's see how many we can take. Let me begin with the first one. How and when will all telematics devices be integrated onto aggregation platforms? Yeah, looks like this one is for you.
Yeah, in a way, this IoT telematic devices and kind of pre-integrated telematic devices. They're both IoT devices and needs and are waiting for aggregation eventually. But this, when it will happen, I don't know. How it seems that there is kind of sector of companies who is trying to resolve this problem. They have more and more connections to different service providers, and it is not like one peak is collecting all the others and takes over the market. So it's not like Android versus Apple or something like that. It is more market of smaller, middle-sized companies who are independent. So we are not providing any telematic solution ourselves, and we have actively actually avoided to have any kind of preferred telematic partner because we have 1,000 of them on our line, and we need to be kind of fair to them. Of course, we analyze who is a little bit better in terms of data, etc. But in general, we try to be independent battleground or independent aggregator. And probably we will see a few of such aggregators who are connected to different systems, to hundreds of systems. Maybe some are more geographically and more focused. Actually, Transporeon is today significantly focused around Europe, but we just recently started our rollout to Asia and America also. And some are kind of wider, but go to maybe to the bigger carriers. Some are going also to the smaller carriers. But overall, we will see a handful of such aggregators. Not many, because it's pretty expensive actually to collect this data. We have seen already consolidation of such providers, and some have bought over the others. Let's see how it will happen with us actually in long term. But yeah, this is and because these platforms do have capability to be connected, they are not completely closed like I know Apple system, for example, is today. Apple has also some kind of sensor location system. They are relatively open, and there is a business system around it, so it can be done. But it will take years, and it is step-by-step journey. So last 5%, maybe it will never be aggregated.
And yeah, out of curiosity, how many telematics devices do you actually need to integrate roughly so that you're able to connect the whole world?
We need to connect to all the trucks and all the vessels. Well, our approach is all the trucks. There are about 10 million of them. I think 5 million in Europe, 5
Wow.
the rest of the world. And but that's not all actually. Also trailers, also containers may have telematics systems. Also, we are aggregating IoT providers like Roambee, for instance, and adding this to the picture. So it's huge world out there. What we don't want to do is to connect to people. That's not our business.
Great. Thanks, Yak. It's a huge world out there, so I think there's a lot of, I'm assuming there's a lot of integrations that's happening as we talk with a lot of different systems. Uh, so another question: what kind of sensors are being used to track assets? Do these sensors send data directly to the cloud? So Scott, maybe you might be better positioned to answer this.
Sure. So, at least within the world of Roambee, we focus on what we call operational supply chain assets. And so we think about shipments as the actual goods that the shipper cares about reaching its destination, and the assets are those that are used to move or to ship and sell products during that supply chain process. So, really, the two different kinds would be returnable assets and work in process assets. So, returnable assets could be a container, it can be a keg, it can be a pallet, returnable plastic crates, insulated pharma box, for example. Whereas a work in process asset could be anything like movable equipment, machinery, um, bins, or even parts that are used in the manufacturing and assembling of goods. And so the sensors used for shipment monitoring and for asset monitoring can often be very different. So returnable assets, you typically most care about its location and location in the world within the cycle, the circular economy of how they're being used. You want to know when they're out in the world, where are they, and what is the dwell time. So having GPS information and connectivity that allows you to know in real time, at least once per day, where that asset is important. You don't necessarily need to have a temperature sensor, humidity, shock tilt, depending on what the asset is. But typically, you streamline it down to GPS and connectivity. If you're dealing within a primarily interior facility, then you can get more streamlined and use beacon technology. And so, for example, this is one of our little bead beacons that uses Bluetooth to connect to gateway sensors, either to a router or even to a cellular connected IoT sensor. And so a much lower price point can be distributed much more. And you can get zone level visibility of is your asset within one zone or another zone? How long has it been there? And so typically the our flagship sensors are for shipment monitoring because they do require condition and security and compliance monitoring versus our asset monitoring ones are a little bit more streamlined and may even be a Bluetooth type device.
Thank you, Scott. I think we have a lot of interesting questions here, but don't think we will have the time to address all of them. And some of them, like what is the ROI in comparison in both terms of investment, we would be addressing those as we move forward. So let's move on to understanding a little bit more in terms of the business challenges. So again, to you, Yak, um, what are the common business challenges that you see that telematics aggregation is like a match made in heaven for? And it would be good if you can basically maybe talk to us about some of the success stories that telematics aggregation has addressed.
Yes. Well, we have some sweet spots and some areas where we are not very strong at. So, first and biggest customers what we had for quite a long time were actually from not really bulk load, but some huge volume-based load transports, which are working in a truck level. So we are following trucks. So whatever fits the truck or even several trucks is unit what we can handle. If it's a very small transport and there are many different ones on the truck, then they may end up with different complex transport routes. And with asset tracking, that's difficult. We need to know always what is the specific license plate number of the truck, where it is sitting. This telematic works based on license plate numbers of trucks, essentially. And if there are many involved, then there is always much higher probability that some data point is missing, or we don't have data for the full area, or we don't know the license plate number, or somebody has given a little bit wrong license plate number. All this can happen. But it works very well if it's full truckload from factory to customer. And our first customers were construction business ones. So you can actually buy insulation for even for private house full truckload. So these factories are doing a lot of truckload, tens of thousands of truckloads per month. And this end-to-end full truckload is really working well done. Whatever goes more complex is more and more difficult. We can do some of that, but in some places we say, sorry, it's not even possible.
Interesting. And Yak, when is it that when a customer comes to you that they have a gap in their supply chain, that telematics aggregation is the way to go? Yak, are you able to hear me?
Uh, I had some slight audio pause. Can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, no problem. So, Yak, following up to what you said, what I think I'm very curious about is at what point do you realize when a customer comes to you, for example, with, say, a business challenge, or they say they have some gaps in their supply chain? You kind of know that telematics aggregation will solve this problem. So, what are those gaps that customers come to you with? Maybe the top three gaps that they come to you with in their supply chain, which telematics aggregation is like a perfect match.
Yeah, what we're first checking is a list of carriers actually, and we know already that some carriers have good telematic connection and some of them are very problematic ones. One very problematic one is subcontracting. If it's a forwarder who actually, there are many forwarders who partially or maybe they don't have trucks at all, then always we have a challenge that we don't get this data from the actual carrier, from the primary carrier or service provider. We get data on the last part of this forwarding chain, and then we need to dig down, and sometimes there is 7 levels of subcontracting. So from this carrier list, we already know that, okay, these carriers are actually doing forwarding too much, so we don't have good visibility there. But if they are big asset owner carriers, then they are probably already connected. If they are very small one, but we don't know, well, we are working with hundreds of thousands of carriers actually. If they're very small ones, then again, we need to connect with them. It needs extra work, and getting this data is more problematic. So this is the carrier side, and then there is a shipper side. From shippers, we get the transport orders. So essentially deliveries from between points, and then from this delivery plan, we evaluate what is the structure. Is it full truckload? Is it less than truckload? Is it container, bulk? All these have different specifics, and more there are no full truckload things, more there will be challenges for us. So we really, and usually customers already know it actually. The shipper is our main customer, not really carrier. From carrier point of view, this aggregation is much less valuable. Only if they use themselves a lot of subcontracting, then they see value of that. Otherwise, they just directly use our telematics system. They have nice user interface and everything, but the value comes from the shipper side. So we look at it from this angle, and yeah, combine data from shipper and carrier.
And Yak, I remember the first time I was chatting with you is you actually said that the telematics aggregation model is the easiest and the most low cost way to actually get going with visibility, right?
Yeah.
So because there is no hardware to purchase, you just log in, name your carriers, they're probably already integrated. If not, you can integrate them and get going. So I think the work that you guys are doing is phenomenal in that you're enabling a transformation where anybody can actually get their hands on visibility, right? And that's, I think, the real meat here in the telematics aggregation model. Uh, Now, with all the pros that we saw of the telematics aggregation model, let's come to Scott in understanding what are the kind of business cases do customers typically come to us on. Scott, we have a lot of them, but if you can talk about the top three or four where sensor-driven visibility is better positioned to solve this problem.
Sure. So to paraphrase what Yak had said, if it's a ground-based shipment, full truckload, you don't care much about condition or compliance, or if you have a reefer connection, for example, and you have the carrier integration, then a telematics aggregation solution makes the most sense. On the sensor-driven side, there's really four uh, times when you would want to consider it: multimodal shipments, condition-sensitive shipments, when you need shipments require compliance and security, as well as visibility and operational assets, which I touched on before. So starting with multimodal. So if it's going to require a plane, it's going to require a boat. There's always a truck on either end, or almost always a truck on either end. If you need real-time monitoring the entire time for location and condition, the only way to guarantee that you have that is with embedded sensors. So take, for example, we have a customer that makes portable consumer external storage. And they were shipping these globally. And when it was getting to their destination, they saw that the casing had been melted and therefore they weren't usable anymore. But they had no visibility as to why. So we embedded sensors with them and we were able to determine that in the handoff at the airport, the pallets were being placed very close to an engine, airplane engine that was producing enough heat to actually melt the outer casing for it. So by having that visibility in between the gaps of the handoffs in multimodal, you have that validated real-time visibility throughout the end-to-end journey. Secondly, condition-sensitive shipments. So whether it's temperature, humidity, shock, tilt, etc. If you need to validate the entire time the threshold, so for example, we work with many manufacturers of large servers, and they transport these servers across long distances to their destinations. And over time, either individual large events or cumulative small events of shock on the truck or other transport can actually impact the quality of it. And at the end, it may no longer be usable or may be degraded. So by understanding these shock events, in mitigating if there's action to be taken before it gets to its destination, as well as understanding over time what are the smoothest routes and taking those so that you can minimize the exposure to damage. That is done at the shipment level with embedded sensors that are measuring shock. Another good example would be vaccines. So we've all learned more about vaccines than we knew 2 years ago and probably wanted to know. But we do know that different vaccines, and all of them have different temperature thresholds from which they need to operate in. And that those thresholds of temperature, if they are outside of that zone, impact the potency of the vaccine, and the potency impacts the efficacy of it. And so we have customers working directly with us for COVID-19 vaccine shipment that they can understand both location as well as condition and make sure that the threshold of the temperature from end to end is within what's necessary so that when it gets to the point where it's going to go in someone's arm, they have the best chance of it being effective. Compliance and security, again, if you want to validate that you've had chain of control, chain of custody the entire time, especially if it's multimodal and multiple handoffs, you have to have firsthand information about it. Did that get accessed? Was there movement of it? Was the door open? Those types of things require to have an asset with it. So, for example, alcohol being moved globally. There are parts of the world where it's unfortunately not uncommon that either an inside job or externally at a truck stop, for example, someone will open up the container and steal some or even replace it with who knows what. So now you've adulterated that shipment and it puts people's health and safety and lives at stake, not to mention even the reputation of the brand. And so that type of understanding of compliance and security is really important. Another example in a company that works with us for destruction of drugs. So once they are expired, they need to get them as quickly as possible to be destroyed. And if they get intercepted, then those go on the market, black market, possibly under their brand name, and they're no longer safe. And so, guaranteeing the chain of control and custody the entire time is a big part of what sensor-driven visibility provides. And then finally, what I talked about earlier was these operational assets, returnable assets, work in process assets. They really do require having an embedded sensor to understand information about their location, but also about their dwell time, about their utilization around their velocity, for example. And you don't even have to have a one-to-one, depending on the type of asset, a one-to-one sensor to asset pairing. You can have a statistically significant amount. If you have millions of RPCs that we work with one customer for, we're monitoring maybe 1/100th of them, because where there's one, there's 1,000. But it really has cut down on asset loss, as well as understanding dwell time and utilizing those assets much more and getting more bang for their buck.
Scott, I think if we really were to summarize the differences now, right, between what Yak and you said, I think sensor-driven visibility is focuses on the shipment rather than the carrier. Biggest
Carrier
difference
agnostic,
for
correct.
starters. The second thing is that it tracks products, so the product can be at a product level, so you can actually go down to monitoring your crates, you can monitor your pallets, you can monitor even a box, which could be of very high importance and value or time sensitive, right? Um, Now that we know the fundamental differences between what these two types of visibility are and what kind of business cases are better tied to when it comes to solving for with these two visibility methods, let's also look at what's not the so hunky-dory stuff. So, yeah, what is telematics aggregation fall short of addressing? Have you got any use cases where you actually said no, this is not the best thing for us?
Yeah. Typically, if it goes to really to complex mode and complex requirements, there is a requirement for environment sensors, for example. This is in some level, it is actually even possible with this built-in telematics. There are some reefers which do have temperature sensors. Actually, they have quite many of them, and we do get the data of that. The challenge of this built-in temperature sensors is interesting is that there are too many of them. We get like 5, 6 sensor feeds, and nobody can actually identify what they are meaning, because each truck can have a little bit different installation. Each load is a little bit different, so we have the data, but we don't have really linkage of the delivery to the specific data point. And this is a difficult thing. So actually here we have suggested that, okay, this data is there, but this linkage creation is actually very difficult. Maybe it's even easier to use some IoT devices attached to the pallets or actual containments of the loads. Yeah, the other case is also what were already mentioned a couple of times already, that's multimodal. If the different modes are changing, or a lot of different trucks even, that's also kind of multimodality. And subcontracting. Subcontracting is, maybe you don't think of this as a challenge right away, but in reality, in the data and business relationships, it makes it almost impossible to track down what is really happening. And in a big multimodal cases, that's also the thing. If you transport container, it's actually subcarrier, subcontractors who are doing the road part. There is maybe ocean liner who is doing the ocean part. And getting all this data, it's logistically very, very difficult. So we really map down where the data is available, and in some cases, yeah, it is not possible to have this end-to-end.
And Scott, what are the use cases that sensor-driven visibility is not the best suited for?
All right, and there are a few. I'll start with supplier inbound visibility. If you are a large enterprise that has hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers, and you want visibility on the inbound side for whether it's ingredients or components for what you're ultimately building, it's very hard to get compliance from many suppliers to use the sensor driven visibility side of the house. you can try. If you're Walmart, maybe you can enforce it, but most companies don't have the ability to, uh, as of now, to handle the logistic complexity of ensuring that your suppliers are using these sensors. Secondly, I would say last mile at the moment is difficult for sensor driven visibility because at the last mile, you're down to the package level, and the value of the good that you're monitoring versus the cost of the sensor to monitor doesn't make sense because oftentimes you're going to lose that sensor, or you add the added complexity of how do I get that back from that last mile. So there is good news in the roadmap in terms of there's a lot of innovation occurring in the industry for labels, whether it's Bluetooth or direct to cloud, that will help to solve that last mile and actually have sensing the entire way. But as of now, it typically doesn't make sense to use sensor driven visibility for that last mile component. And then finally, we alluded to it already, but there's a higher price point today to use sensor driven visibility than there is for telematics aggregation visibility. So if you're tracking something like coffee filters, for example, and you don't care about the condition of it, or it's relatively stable, I should say, um, there's no need to pay more for that portion of your portfolio.
Scott, when you say labels, you're talking about disposable labels, right? So I think
Correct.
the audience
Correct.
might want to
One
just
time,
get that.
one time use.
One-time use labels, yes. Um, so I think if we were to really summarize what we covered so far with Yak and Scott, one is really what level can the visibility go down to? What is the source of the data for each types of visibility? So for telematics, it's basically carriers and the devices that the carriers install, which is aggregated at the platform. And then with sensor, it's basically the sensor coming as part of the stack or the solution, right? And it is not dependent on the carriers, and it's typically better when you have multiple chain of custody. Of course, and we also saw, I think, to really summarize where each of these kind of fall short in solving. So Yak said the telematics aggregation is not the best for some of the multimodal use cases, or when you require condition data at a product level. While Scott talks about the last mile, where it goes down to a package level, and it would be very sensors on each of the packages, or it may not be of cost benefit till it comes down to becoming a label, and so on. So I think with pretty good understanding of the nuances of these two models of gaining supply chain visibility, I'd like to pause again and take some questions before we move on to uh, kind of summarizing and discussing how and what businesses can leverage and get. So, Green Room, could you pull up the questions so far, please? Great. We have a whole lot again, Scott and Yak. Uh, Let me go one by one. So, need to understand about the aggregator platform, how it was built and integrated with various telematics devices. Yak, I think this is a really good one because I'm sure there are multiple standards, multiple vendors, and aggregating this would have not been an easy job. So, could you throw some light on it?
Somebody wants to build a competitor to us, maybe. But well, there are two levels. One is the technical level, and another is business level. In technical level, it's a big data. So we have a one big data database, and then we connect to different providers. Different providers have different interfaces, but as the data is relatively simple, there is a timestamp, there is latitude and longitude coordinates, and that's actually all of minimal data. Then we have a really standardized process, and our small team of I don't know, maybe 5 people now or something, they can add 5 to 10 different new API types every week. So they have added hundreds and hundreds of them already. because yeah, it seems every provider uses own protocol, and telematic providers are not carriers themselves. They are also third-party providers who have delivered some hardware and some software service. So some of them are bigger. There is, I think, Transix is most popular. TomTom. Uh, yeah, there are some bigger brands also. These are covering a lot of trucks, but we are also working with providers who have maybe 20 trucks or 30 trucks only connected. So there are a lot of them, but it's kind of routine connection to new API with some fields a little bit different, but in principle, not so many surprises. So this is a challenge of big data, and for this to work, we need from every carrier to know what is their username and password and what kind of telematic systems they are using. But now with this username and passwords, there is a business challenge. You cannot just start with aggregation. Well, we tried it. We went to carriers, asked, okay, what is your username and password to your fleet tracking system? Of course, they yeah, us back to say politely, you're crazy. Why you are asking? That's our private data. Maybe they try to sell this data actually to us, but then there is a business motivation question, and the trick is that there must be some interested party who is directly or indirectly can force essentially carriers to give this data, and that's a shipper. So if I'm shipper, I'm I don't know, Nestle or Procter and Gamble, I am just giving every carrier requirement for compatibility and for compliance that you must give us visibility. So nowadays it's not enough if you come with a truck just to load something. You also must give visibility what is happening after you have done the loading. And have bought this idea, essentially they always see that they need to know what is happening. So they say to carriers that, sorry, this kind of data must become available for all the shipments. And with this information, we went to carriers one by one, to hundreds of them, to tens of thousands of them, actually. And asked that, okay, you need to provide this data because otherwise you will lose your Procter and Gamble as a shipper. And this carrier went to their fleet management provider and says that, okay, you need to connect to a six-fold aggregation system right now. And it works. And after a couple of years, we stopped actually calling out the carriers because carriers themselves checked with us that, okay, I have new contract with a shipper. This requires six-fold visibility. What can I do to connect to that? And also, of course, we had a lot of connections already pre-prepared, so it is just connecting and onboarding. And so we can have hundreds of carriers every day onboarded with self-service and automatically.
Yeah, thank you for the detailed story there. And I think I hear you when you say the challenges that you faced. Not easy. I think the next question is probably better suited for Scott. Scott, real time visibility versus event based visibility. As I grasp here, event based is based on data provided by sensors. I think perfect question up your alley.
Yes. So the term real time is interesting. It means a lot of things to different people. There is a category defined right now called real-time transportation visibility platforms, and that's largely defined by the six folds, the four kites, the Project 44s, the Shipios of the world that are using telematics-based aggregation. And the word real-time is in the category, right? We would say, as a sensor-driven visibility company, that we are a real time, right? We can provide even more real time, but that's not a very elegant way of saying it. What I would say is that if you're talking about real time alerts versus events when it comes to sensors, an alert is based on a ping frequency. So you can monitor every second if you want, but you're going to run out of battery real quick. Or you can monitor once every 10 minutes or once an hour or whatever makes sense to do so. And based on that reporting threshold, if there is a location geofence out of geofence, for example, or condition alerts, it will report at that frequency. An event is based on a listener. So a shock event, for example, would be as soon as that shock event occurs, it passes a threshold for it, then it would transmit that. So that the event actually requires event-based monitoring requires a little bit more battery because you have to have that always on listening in order to do so. So that's the difference. But it's if you're talking about aggregated telematics visibility, that's IoT as well, as Yak said, right? And so it also depends on how frequently the fleet management system, the telematics system, is communicating uh, to that vendor as well.
Maybe I can add on here that telematics, by average, we get location updates every 2 minutes. I think sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes it's 1 hour during nighttime, but overall we try to get 1 minute, but in reality, the average is 2 minutes. But that's the only thing what we know is a location. So whatever is really happening in that we need to deduct somehow from the location. Some things we can deduct from this. For example, if location is in the middle of Sahara deserts, then it must be hot, so we can even deduct the temperature from that indirectly. But seriously, we're mostly deducting geofencing from there, so we know where the truck is and when it was there. But it's not only looking at the past. Of course, we bigger value is looking to the future. So we try to estimate what is happening in the next day, next several days until end of this delivery. So with every minute, we calculate the new estimated time of arrivals to the next stops. And this is something which also depends on map data and a lot of other things there. So there is a lot of kind of added intelligence on top of just location data. And this makes it much more richer. Even through the raw data is pretty simple, just location. We can kind of calculate a lot of alerts and information on top of that also. But yeah, whatever is more complex events are door opened of the truck or it's really arrived to the gate, we don't see it from telemetry. We get this fuzzy location signal and hopefully the address of location is correct because we get a lot of wrong location addresses also and then we detect gives these events wrong even automatically. So it's good and bad. Good is it's fully automatic. Bad is that it's fully automatic and we don't get anything extra.
And yeah, that brings us to actually a very interesting question that I see on the chat here. So, what is the uptime of telematics devices aggregated onto platforms like Transporeon? Because obviously, we talked about this that there are multiple brands. The standards are all. It's not always one standard, right?
Yeah.
And thirdly, most importantly, somebody else is controlling or somebody else has bought and installed these devices. So, we have no idea about the warranty, the maintenance, and all of that stuff. So, what's been your experience? I mean, do you get pretty high uptime from many of these telematics devices? And what do you kind of do to ensure that the customer is always getting the data that they need?
Yeah, there are a little bit different quality standards, but usually it is pretty high. We don't have much issues with that. A little bit richer data comes from OEMs, which means Daimler, Mercedes, Volvo, the actual producers of the trucks, they are really connected to CAN bus and kind of lower level of systems. These aftermarket ones are much cheaper and they also don't work so reliably. But generally, we do get data. We actually more see data loss because the carrier actively actually doesn't want to send this data. They don't want to show to the shippers where the truck is today. Why they are doing? We have some funny stories and about that and our own guesses. Often it's quite legitimate. It's really outside of working hours for the drivers, so they need. In Europe, there are strict laws about that. You need to protect it. We cannot follow the truck during weekend, for example. But sometimes they turn it off and then forget it to turn it back on, and then we lose hours of data. And, we don't really know what is happening because this data is kind of pushed to us. It comes or it doesn't come. Why it doesn't come, we don't really see. But we do calculate some metrics, so we can show to the shippers that okay, this carrier gives very good data, but this carrier is sending some bad data, and some carriers even try to fake data. To be honest, So they just send location in the delivery in correct time and correct location, and then hope that we will show everything was on time. Actually, obviously,
And this is where
data
I'm
was not
assuming that your
accurate.
predictive analytics start coming in, right? Because now that you know, I may be missing one of these data points. And also to what Scott said, I mean, this is common to both types of visibility, right? You don't have to always have all the data to make the decision. You actually have a lot of past data which you can actually use to, and the machine learns, right?
Yes, this is we need to be always ready that some data is missing and it's kind of a fuzzy signal. And we are using machine learning models to predict future states and sometimes to fill the gaps of the data also.
And Scott, looks like somebody's looking to build an RFP for sensor-driven visibility. They want to know what are the parameters
Mm,
one should be looking at for sensor-driven visibility. But excellent question.
absolutely,
Can you
great
throw some
question.
light on this?
Sure. So, um, first, I'd start off with understanding if the vendor you're considering has their own portfolio of sensors. Do they design them? Do they have the operational capabilities to work with you in terms of get you the proper volume that you need to the origins to pick them up at the destinations for you, and have them all operate correctly with your or with the platform in terms of a smart firmware. And there are options out there for sensor agnostic companies, but we feel like if you don't have that direct experience, it's very, very difficult to understand both the intricacies of working with sensors as well as the actual logistics of returning them and reconditioning them. Secondly, we want to understand the breadth of sensors. So, what is it you care about? What type of monitoring? Is it um, condition monitoring? Is it multimodal monitoring? Is it security monitoring? Do they have the type of sensors that can provide that for you? Third, do they work in the geographies that you actually care about? That obviously connectivity is part of that, but also certifications from an airline perspective or to actually have devices certified in that country to work, as well as certifications that are industry specific. So, for example, a pharmaceutical company wants to work with a vendor that has the proper quality certifications from ISO, GAMP5, et cetera, so that they can validate their own processes and can work directly with them. Um, and so I think in total, what we're talking about here, and the reason why Transporeon and Roambee have a partnership is that we clearly see that there are times when six-fold Transporeon's type of visibility works best, and when a sensor-driven visibility works best. And what we're able to do and offer now to the market is to have a integrated visibility experience, whether if you want Roambee, as we as the experts in the sensor-driven side, those signals integrated into sixfold, or if you want to work with the sixfold data directly into Roambee, or even combined and aggregate with an API into your own system, we have that option now as well.
Yes, absolutely, Scott. And that really brings us to this partnership. So, yeah, can you kind of tell us how businesses should go forward with supply chain visibility? Because there's a lot of digitization happening right now in companies, right? And there's mandates to completely transform from paper process to digital. And as part of that, a lot of companies are saying supply chain visibility is a must for me. So when they are shopping for visibility, how do you suggest they go about? Should they invest in something that's easy, lower cost, and fast, like telematics first, and then dig into where I need to really use sensor invisibility? Or do you see there's a smarter approach here on what companies should invest on first? Yeah.
Yeah, with telematic-based visibility, it's relatively straightforward. So with existing system running, we know what to expect. We need license plate numbers of trucks for every delivery. We need to know the delivery data from where to where it is going, so we can calculate also ETAs and alerts. So it is quite straightforward, but the limits are also known. with the sensor things, I believe you will need to start with some trial or some deeper analysis of what is really the expectation, how it works, how you do the logistics and reverse logistics for these devices. So it is somewhat more. Maybe it's for me. We have not yet have so many of these IoT projects. They seem to be not so standardized or not so straightforward how it will work for every customer case. What we have seen is that the customers and shippers are very different. So even if you think that two similar building material producers do things similarly, no, they can be very inventive of organizing things in different way. But what we see in Transporeon as a kind of advantage for many shippers, especially bigger ones, is not kind of visibility per se. This is already becoming kind of a minimal requirement or as a granted as part of this supply chain management. But is that we are providing integrated solution with many other parts also, and this is pre-integrated and it works as kind of one solution covering several problems, because a lot of costs and time and pain goes actually to the system integration. And if you take one visibility provider from there and then TMS from another system, time slot management from second, and maybe invoicing system from a fourth company, and then try to put it together, then you discover that actually, even through maybe separately, these companies look more fancy. If you're really focused to one thing, then you can have a very fancy solution. Then after this integration, which will be maybe a year of project easily in bigger setup, then you will actually lose these extra advantages, and you have spent a lot of time and money to just to make it to work together. And Transporeon approach is to pre-integrate it. We are actually just recently acquired a couple of additional companies who are doing very well non-full truckload transport management and planning. We are connecting now real-time visibilities are also right now. We have an ocean visibility provider, and we are putting it together as a system which is simple for middle and bigger shipper perspective, where really the integration to the SAP system or Oracle TMS or other systems can easily be a year, or actually we've seen 2-3 year projects. And we can save a lot of effort of that. And another thing is also customization possibilities. So you can have very fancy user interface, but if you don't have a single sign-on system or some compliance which needs and customization to the customer processes, this, if you are a Procter & Gamble, then you have very specific processes which are very well thought of and optimized, and your IT needs to follow it. And if it is not customizable, it can be very beautiful and show very nice numbers or graphs, for example. It's not useful for you. It needs to be adapted. And Transporeon core system is built on this requirement actually already for 20 years. So it is heavily customizable.
Excellent, Yak. And I think this is really driving to where this partnership that Roambee and Transporeon struck recently, right, is based on your use case, based on your business challenge. You can actually get the best of both worlds. So, for example, if you're in the commodity space and you need visibility on road, chances are that you might want to opt for telematics aggregation. But if you're a pharma company or a food company running cold chain, where you have to ensure quality compliance, and you want to move to real time instead of data loggers, right? You want to basically come to sensor driven. And Scott, do you want to talk a little bit about the partnership and really how this is adding value from a user perspective? Because now they don't have to shop everywhere, right? So how is this platform really coming together, and how can the users of Transporeon and the users of Roambee today truly benefit with the best of both worlds?
Right. So again, it comes down to, as you said, use case, and most of the companies we work with have a complex and varied enough portfolio of products where they have different needs for different portions of their portfolio. But most companies don't want to use multiple different screens for visibility and understand different systems and how they work. And so by working with the both of us now, let's say you're an existing Transporeon and Sixfold customer, but you want to add additional visibility to condition sensitive goods, then you can still work directly with Transporeon, who will work with Roambee to ensure that we get the sensors embedded in your shipments in the right volume in the right configuration, for example. And then through an API, that information will go directly into the Sixfold Transporeon system. So you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting that accuracy, granularity, and timeliness from Roambee, but without having to pivot. Likewise, if you are a Roambee customer and you have different parts of your portfolio where you don't feel like I need to pay that price point, you can work with still with Roambee, but get integrated carrier integration information to provide just what is good enough for us, as well as that same data can now be used also for further validation for the entirety of all the inputs as well. And as I mentioned, a lot of our enterprise customers, I think, jointly choose to work in their own system, whether it's within an ERP or something they built, customized, or even for analytics. And so all of this are different signals that can be used that can then be brought into their system, and they can perform both operational real-time analytics or the further supply chain planning and optimization side from all the inputs that we provide. And of course, we also both provide our own tools for analytics as well.
Thank you, Scott. And ladies and gentlemen, we are past our closing time. Time ran because we had a lot of questions, and to be honest, there are still quite a bit of questions to be answered. So we will try to basically get back to some of you if possible. But I also encourage you to proactively go to our websites if you have specific questions about Transporeon's product or Roambee's products. Please go to our website and just send us an inquiry, and somebody will be there with you to solve your business challenge. As we come to the close of the session, I know we can keep going on about this, but we do have an opportunity to connect again. We are planning another webinar on this topic, but one which will be much deeper in terms of giving you product insights, the business insights you can derive, the reports, the analytics, and very precisely on how you can solve some of your business challenges and use cases. It's coming up next quarter. So if you're registered for this, you will definitely get an email. So please do watch out for it. And we look forward to your participation just like this time. A lot of engagement today. So thank you for making this a very lively event. And before we leave, I request all the panelists to basically do kind of a fun wave. Maybe my wave is like whatever it is. Let's all just pose for the camera and do one fun wave before we sign off.
I don't know what's culturally inappropriate, so I'm just going to stay safe and say two hands. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I'm with you. Scott, why don't let's look at your hands? No, I think we overpowered you, Scott. Just kidding. Thank you, guys. Thanks everyone for joining in. I know it's late in some parts of the world, so thanks for taking the time off again. And we definitely look forward to meeting with you on our next webinar where we dive further into this topic. Thank you. Have a good morning, afternoon, and evening.